Hello fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I am going to be doing a huge deep read of The Shining. I just want to really quickly talk about the 70s a little bit when this novel came out. It came out in 1977, and I think the 70s were an interesting time in spirituality for people. There were departments in colleges that studied paranormal activity and psychic abilities and stuff like that, because I feel like the 70s was a time where people really had a lot of belief in the concept that we don't know all of the mysteries of the human mind and the things that are out there, and ghosts and life beyond death, and all of these concepts. And the 70s, I think, really embraced that concept. I think about it most when I think about the movie Ghostbusters at the beginning, where I think it's Bill Murray's character is testing psychic abilities in people, and of course just messing around with the students that he's testing to hilarious results. For some odd reason, I remember the person getting shocked and spitting out their gum. That was incredibly funny to me as a kid. So it did go into the 80s, but the 80s brought a cynicism that started to kind of erode that concept. Of course, I don't know in the 70s if they would make a movie that would make fun of the people studying these concepts, but in the 80s they started to make fun of that concept. And I only bring this up because I think it's very important in this book, The Shining, especially with Danny's shine. I think Stephen King is writing of his time, an excitement about the possibilities of the power of the human mind that we only understand, or only understood at that time, just the smallest amount about. So I think it's important that we start with thinking about that a little bit. Okay, so the genesis of this book is a story that I think a lot of people know, but I'm going to go over it here again. And it all starts around the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. Stephen King had written Carrie and Salem's Lot, and both of them took place in Maine, and was starting to do well for himself as a writer, and decided that for his next book he wanted a change of scene. So he opened an atlas, and the story goes he randomly pointed, and he happened to point at Boulder, Colorado. So they decided to spend a year in the Rockies away from Maine so that he could get ideas for another book. And of course, Stephen King is prolific with his ideas. They're incredible. So they stayed at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, and the way he explains it is that they were the only guests in the hotel because the hotel was about to close for the season. The Stanley, as far as I know, doesn't ever seasonally close, but maybe they did at one time. I wasn't really able to get a direct answer to this question, but either way, what we do know is that Stephen King and Tabitha and his children were I would assume his children. I don't know if his children were there. It doesn't say anything about his children. But anyway, Stephen King and Tabitha, I wonder if he had children by that time. I don't know. Stephen King and Tabitha were the only ones there. And the hotel was incredibly spooky. And he walked all around it. And eventually they had dinner. And they had dinner in the main ballroom, which you can see a picture of here. And all the tables had the chairs up on them except for the one table that they were using. And then the staff were playing music for them while they ate, and it was echoing through these empty halls. And after dinner, I think Tabitha went up to the room, and of course it was in room 217 that they stayed, and he decided to go to the bar for a drink, and he was served by a bartender named Grady. And here you can see the bar. I didn't get a great shot of the bar. I've been to this hotel twice, and unfortunately failed to get a picture of the bar. And this setting was so incredible that he started to memorize all of it. And he had read The Veldt by Ray Bradbury a couple years before, and he was kind of obsessed with the idea of making a story about a psychic child whose thoughts become real, and in the original story in his brain, and the name of the story he was kind of writing in his head was called Darkshine, and in it his child protagonist who had psychic abilities would be in what he called a psychic carnival. And he remembered this story while he was sitting at the Stanley Hotel, apparently looking at the view of the Rockies. I don't think we took a picture of this, but the view of the mountains from the porch of the Stanley is incredible. It's a wonderful view. My brother was mentioned while we were walking out and just standing and looking that, wow, that mountain is incredible, and he's absolutely right. And apparently Stephen King then went up to his room 217, and slept, and he had a nightmare that his kid... So he must have had kids. Yeah, he totally had kids. At least one of them. Yeah, in King's words, he said, "That night I dreamed of my 3-year-old son running through the corridors, looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide, screaming. He was being chased by a fire hose. I woke up with a tremendous jerk, sweating all over, within an inch of falling out of bed. I got up, lit a cigarette, sat in the chair, looking out the window at the Rockies, and by the time the cigarette was done, I had the bones of the book firmly set in my mind." Which is incredible. So he wanted to get away to get a different atmosphere, and he went and he stayed at the Stanley, and he got that. He got the full idea for the bones of the book, and the Stanley was so inspirational to him in that moment. He wanted, I mean, straight down to the elevator. The elevator at the Stanley, and it's a little more modernized now, but it wasn't always that way, literally has a diamond glass door or a diamond window in the elevator door that you can look through, and that plays a huge role. There's a glass plate with a little key that stops the elevator in case of an emergency. I took a picture of it. You can see it here. It plays a huge part of the book. There's a part where the elevator is running because of ghosts, and the whole family are freaked out in front of the elevator, and Jack Torrance literally punches that piece of glass, takes out the key, and stops the elevator. It really inspired him, straight down to the bartender being named Grady. I wonder where that guy is. It'd be really crazy if you were the person that served Stephen King at the Stanley Hotel and you were immortalized as Grady in The Shining. That would be very, very cool. So yeah, this Genesis is what created the novel. Of course, the haunted hotel is only one of the themes in the book. The other two is alcoholism and abuse. And I want to read what Stephen King has said directly about these other themes coming into the novel. "Sometimes you confess. You always hide what you're confessing to. That's one of the reasons why you make up the story. When I wrote The Shining, for instance, the protagonist of The Shining is a man who has broken his son's arm, who has a history of child beating, who is beaten himself, and as a young father with 2 children, I was horrified by my occasional feelings of real antagonism toward my children. Won't you ever stop? Won't you ever go to bed? And time has given me the idea that probably there are a lot of young fathers and young mothers, both who feel very angry, who have angry feelings toward their children. But as somebody who has been raised with the idea that father knows best, and Ward Cleaver on Leave It to Beaver and all this stuff, I would think to myself, oh, if he doesn't shut up, if he doesn't shut up. So when I wrote this book, I wrote a lot of that down and tried to get it out of my system. But it was also a confession. Yes, there are times when I felt very angry towards my children, and have even felt as though I could hurt them. Well, my kids are older now. Naomi is 15 and Joey is 13 and Owen is 8. And they're all super kids. And I don't think I've laid a hand on my kids in probably 7 years. But there was a time. And the quote ends there. The novel took him about 4 months to write. And he published it. The name apparently comes from Instant Karma, the song by John Lennon, the chorus of which is "And We All Shine On." And apparently his publishers at Doubleday didn't want him to publish this novel right after Carrie and Salem's Lot because they were worried he would be typecast after that as a horror writer. And Stephen King kind of felt that was a compliment, so he didn't worry about publishing this book. And of course, this book really cemented him as the world's greatest horror writer at that point. It took him to superstar status. It really did. Next, I want to talk about influences on The Shining, and then we'll get into the deep read proper. The first major influence, and the one that King has pointed to a lot, and other people have pointed out as well, is Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. And the interesting thing about Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House is she is vague on the haunting. I don't think she's vague on whether there are ghosts or not. I feel like the novel expressly has situations that can only be explained by ghost phenomena. I'm thinking specifically of the scariest part of the book where she's holding the two friends hearing this yelling and smacking of the walls, and they hold hands because they're super scared, and the lights turn on and they're all the way across the room from each other, so there was no way they could be holding hands. So it's a book that absolutely has ghosts, but the ghosts aren't the main point. The main character in The Haunting of Hill House slowly becomes obsessed with Hill House, and she's psychic. Not psychic. She has powers, unspecified psychic powers. When she's a kid, she makes rocks rain down onto her house. If you've read Stephen King's Carrie, you can see Shirley Jackson in his writing again. So she has this psychic phenomena that she's able to create, and because of that, the house really wakes up around her and takes a little bit of control over her until she feels like the house is hers. So he took this idea and decided that he wanted to take it up a notch. Of course, you can also see huge Poe influence in this, in the Fall of the House of Usher, where the haunted house is the kind of main character of the story. It's really incredible. I've done a video on it. You can go look back on it. I'll link it at the end of this video too. And a couple more actually, I'm sorry. He also was inspired by Poe's The Mask of Red Death, which is the story of a plague coming to a party. So people are having a good time and partying, and the Red Death visits them. And the Red Death is metaphorically turned into this human at a masquerade ball. In The Shining, the ghosts are represented by this party, this masked party that's very inspired by the Red Death. And then last but not least, he was inspired by a book called Burnt Offerings, which is a book I'm going to do on this channel sometime, and I'm sure Jason will do the movie. It's written by Robert Marosco. I don't know if I can say this name right. Let me see. Yeah, Robert Marosco. If I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry. This book came out in 1973 and is kind of the first modern haunted house story. And it's the earliest one that I know of, and there could be Victorian ghost stories with this trope. I don't know, and I do love Victorian ghost stories, but I haven't read them all. But this novel is about people that have to leave their apartment. I can't remember why. It's been so long since I've read this, but they move into a house that is super cheap, a really ridiculously good deal, and but I think there's a woman that lives there that they have to kind of take care of while they live there, and they have to upkeep the house. And anyway, it turns out to be haunted and is kind of feeding off them, and it makes the husband go a little abusive, and not even a little bit, he goes super abusive. And this is, as far as I know, the first modern horror use of that trope. So we can see that book kind of all over this as well. In that Stephen King wanted to create a story where the question that we always ask ourselves in haunted house stories, which is, why don't they just leave, is answered. And people have fought with that all the time. They're renovating the house. It's all they can afford. They've sunk all their money into it. There's a lot of reasons why it would be hard to leave a house, but Stephen King wanted to make sure that that question was never asked of his haunted house story. So of course he isolated them in the mountains. The Stanley really gave him the ability to answer that. So yeah, all of these pieces of literature influenced Stephen King, and he shows that by constantly referring to them in the text. The most referred to story in this text is The Mask of Red Death. He's constantly repeating a refrain from that story about the Red Death coming to the party whenever the party scene occurs. He mentions the haunting of Hill House in this. He does not mention burnt offerings. I think that was a little too modern for him to mention in this. But he also mentions a couple of other stories that I think is really incredible. And these are in connection to Danny. And Stephen King, in this book, writes from the perspective of a 5-year-old boy, which sounds incredibly hard to me, and Stephen King does it justice. He kills it. He does a great job. And one of the ways that he does that is by showing that Danny's frame of reference to everything that's going on is filtered through all the fairy tales that his dad and his mom have read him. And he uses, I think, 3 fairy tales for this. Number 1, and most importantly, is the fairy tale of Bluebeard, which is one of the scariest fairy tales of all time. And it's about a man that marries a woman and takes her to a palace, and life is wonderful, and they're very rich. But he has to leave town, and he says, there's a room in this house that you can never go to, and this golden key opens it. But I'm going to trust you and trust that you don't open the room. So the fairy tale is all about her slowly becoming obsessed and curious about this door, and she finally opens it with the little golden key and finds that Bluebeard has had many wives before her, and they've all been killed and are in this room, and the floor is like covered in their blood, and she gets blood on the key that won't wash off, and Bluebeard comes back and says, I trusted you not to open the door, and you did, and now I'm going to have to kill you. And eventually she's saved by her brothers, but that's not important to the story for what Stephen King used it in The Shining, and that is specifically Danny going into room 217. He's promised Hallorann that he will not go into room 217, but he ends up going in there, and the metaphor or the analogy of the Bluebeard story is used throughout this novel to explain his curiosity in going in there. It's incredible. The big bad wolf appears constantly. Jack is talked about being a wolf. One of the topiaries is a dog that seems very wolf-like, and of course they just bring up Little Red Riding Hood a lot. Stephen King does when he's looking through Danny's eyes, and also the 3 Little Pigs. So these 3 stories are really integral to Danny's understanding of the situation, which is really wonderful. I think Stephen King often uses literature or old books that he's read as an analog to what's going on in his stories, and I think that's really incredible. The novel Alice in Wonderland is another story that is constantly referred to when when we're in Danny's head. A lot of down the rabbit hole. Danny at one point falls into a black void in this clock. And he says down the rabbit hole. But yeah, the Alice's reference are really thick in here as kind of a reflection of the fact that the minute that they stepped into the Overlook Hotel, they've entered a reality that is not of this earth, not the same reality. I don't want to say not of this earth. That is fantasy. They've left reality when they enter the Overlook by themselves. They leave reality and go to a horror wonderland, which was really, really incredible. Okay, we've gone through so many parts, and we haven't even really gotten into the meat of the book yet, so it's about time to get there. Okay, on to the deep read specifically. We're going to keep doing this in sections, and I want to really quickly say that the synopsis of this story is very simple, and I find this true with a lot of Stephen King's work. The synopsis of this story, of course, is that Jack Torrance and Wendy Torrance and Danny Torrance all go to stay at the Overlook Hotel by themselves and get snowed in. They choose to do that because the family is down on its luck, mainly to Jack's alcoholism and his violence. So the family is in a bad situation. This job is saving them, and the hotel turns out to be haunted. And because of Danny's shine, the hotel gets more powerful and more powerful and possesses Jack and tries to make him kill his family. That's the basic plot. Usually in these deep reads, I like to go plot point by plot point, and I'm not going to do it with this one because that plot is very simple when it comes right down to it, and incredible. I really like it. And what I've found with Stephen King, the power of his writing, which is absolutely incredible, is his development of characters. And I've already talked about this a little bit in my quick review of why you should read The Shining. If you haven't seen that one already, you can watch that video. So the way I want to start this one is to start with a look at all the characters, and through describing the characters a little bit, we'll get a large chunk of the first part of the book discussed. And I want to start with Danny, who's an incredibly interesting character. Like I said, he's 5 years old, and right away the concept of writing kids is very hard. Writing a 5-year-old sounds incredibly difficult, and I think Stephen King absolutely killed it doing this. He did so good. But Danny's a unique kid, and one of the most awesome parts about Danny is that he is born with a cowl over his face, a skin. So when he's first born, he looks like he has no face, which explains the first Signet paperback editions cover that I'll put up over here, where you have this very silver cover with the outline of a child's face, but with no face. And Stephen King explains this, and I've never done a lot of research into this, but I'm sure that his source, that this is a true thing. I don't think he just made it up. That this is a sign in many cultures and spiritualities that the child is born as a prophet, as a seer. And of course, that leads us to the concept of the shine. Danny has the shine. And the shine is kind of an all-powerful, or an all-encompassing power. It allows him to read people's minds, to have premonitions of the future. It allows him to communicate telepathically. It's incredible. But Danny doesn't really understand this. And of course, his parents don't know anything about it. They can't really comprehend it. Although, as time goes on, they slowly begin to realize more and more that there's something special about Danny, to where about, I'd say, 3/4 into the novel, they're 100% believers that Danny has the shine and can absolutely use it. But to Danny's forming brain, he doesn't understand that he's different than people, and it confuses him. And when he has premonitions, he goes under like a shaman into this trance state. Really, really cool stuff, and I really feel like could only be born in the 70s, which is why I wanted to talk about the 70s at the beginning of this. So the way that Danny deals with this is psychologically, and he doesn't even realize he's doing this, is he separates his power into another being, and that being is called Tony. So he has an imaginary friend that he calls Tony, and Tony is the one that shows him these premonitions and basically takes all of Danny's powers and separates them into Tony, so it doesn't feel like it's him, it's Tony. And of course, Danny's shine is more powerful than most. It's really off the charts. And the hotel wants to use this, and we'll get into that later when we talk about the hotel itself. The next character I want to talk about is Wendy. Wendy is incredibly resourceful in the book. If you watched our discussion on Kubrick's The Shining, you'll know that Kubrick changed Wendy in his movie in order to be a person that would accept abuse a lot longer than anybody else would be capable of. He needed a character that would make sense. Wendy has that. She does stay with Jack through a lot of crap, but she is resourceful and is able to fight and is very much a mama bear when it comes to taking care of her kid. Wendy has a really rocky relationship with her mother. Her mother is a bit of a control freak and has a tendency to hold a grudge and blame people. So Wendy is terrified that she has picked up some of these traits. And this connects to Jack, of course. Jack at one point dislocated Danny's shoulder, and because of that, Wendy can't help but blame him anytime anything happens to Danny, which is a trait that she connects with her mother, that she hates in herself. But at the same time, I found that interesting because Jack has definitely showed tendencies toward this, so why wouldn't you instantly blame him? It's a really interesting story. But Wendy is kind of the straight guy if you thought of this as a comedy, in the sense that she is the most grounded of all these characters. Her desire is to be happily married to the man she loves, her husband Jack, and also take care of her son and have a normal family. And unfortunately, Jack and Danny are making that very impossible. Danny has these trances that are terrifying because they don't know that he has the shine, so they think he might be sick, either mentally or physically. There's constantly doctors coming in, and Jack is an alcoholic abuser. So there's so much trauma in her life that I don't think King wanted to make her a character that was also full of trauma. He made her kind of the valiant hero that was just trying to create a life where she could have the things that she wanted, her husband and her son, and a happy life. And unfortunately, that's not possible, which could be a statement Stephen King is trying to make about abuse. Next, of course, is Jack Torrance. And this is... It's weird. I believe Jack is the protagonist of this story. I absolutely do. At times, it changes to Danny. By the end of the novel, Jack is the hotel. So our protagonist completely exits. And Hallorann becomes the protagonist, and Wendy becomes the protagonist. And then in the end, Danny becomes the protagonist. It's an interesting novel in that King writes in the omniscient style where he can jump from character to character's head. So that means that the protagonist is in a constant state of flux throughout this novel, but we learn a lot about Jack. Jack is a man who was raised by a monster of a father, a terrible abuser. And Jack has memories of his father beating his mother almost to death with his cane. And he always would yell while he was beating them, "You're going to take your medicine," and call everybody pups. And I only bring that up because Jack starts taking all of those traits of his father in when he is taken over by the hotel and is trying to kill his family. So Jack grows up with this evil, abusive father, and with a mother that he absolutely loves, but who allows this abuse and even corroborates her abusive husband's stories in front of the kids. So he's got this horrible upbringing, and he becomes a teacher and an alcoholic, and just drinks and goes to classes hungover. And eventually he has an incident with another student, or with a student, one of his students. He's in the debate club, and he screws this kid over because he's afraid that the kid's lisp is going to embarrass him. It's messed up, and Jack is in a constant state of shifting blame. So he lies to himself, specifically about changing the time on the clock so this kid has less time to talk in the debate club, and on and on and on. Anyway, they end up in an altercation, and Jack beats up this student. So, of course, he has to leave the school. He no longer has a job, and he's really good friends with this guy. I think Al Shockton is his name. And this guy is super rich, and he is Jack's drinking buddy. They go out drinking constantly. One point, before the altercation with the student, Jack comes home drunk one day, and Danny has spilled beer on his papers, and Jack gets angry and grabs him by the arm and dislocates his arm. And you'd think that would be enough for him to stop drinking, but no. And Wendy's getting super close to divorce, and this is all the first part of the book. You're not gonna pick this book up and instantly get ghosts coming out of hotels. This entire beginning story needs to be told, and it's done very beautifully, and it's closer to a drama than a horror novel. It really is. So he's kind of lost his job. He's abused his son, and of course right after that he says, "I'll never lay a hand on him again," and he tries to keep to his word. I think he does keep to his word after that, but he keeps drinking. And then one night, Al Shockton, which I think is his name, and him are out driving, and they hit a bicycle, and they're drunk, and they are not sure if the bicycle had a kid on it. It's really crazy. It could just be that a bicycle was left in the middle of the road and they hit an empty bicycle, or it could be that they had a kid, and both of them are just shocked to the core, and they both say, "Okay, we're quitting drinking. We are quitting drinking. That's it." And they look the next day in the papers to see if any accidents had occurred, and there's no story about anybody hitting a kid or anything like that. So they're happy that they probably didn't actually hit a child, but it's enough to shock them into sobriety. So they both quit, and Jack is trying to do everything he can to not drink again and not be abusive and be a good father to Danny and a good wife to Wendy. And he is trying to fix past mistakes, and you really start to feel for the guy, this abusive alcoholic. You start to feel for him because everybody deserves a chance at change, and Wendy believes that, even though she can't help but constantly be terrified that he's going to relapse. And anybody that's gone through the trauma of an alcoholic in their family, of course, are going to constantly have the fear that it could start again. So Wendy has this fear, but everything is going very well. And then Al Shockton says that he's going to hook Jack up with a job being the maintenance man at this hotel over the winter. and it will allow Jack to write his play. He's trying to write a play that will go to Broadway and make him enough money to finally make it, and he'll be a great writer, and everything will work out. And this is Jack's hope, and Wendy's hope, and Danny's hope as they enter the Overlook Hotel. Last but not least, I want to talk about Hallorann, who is the only character of color. I think there's many side characters in the novel, but Hallorann is the only main character in the novel who is a person of color. And I find this happens a lot in Stephen King novels. Stephen King was writing, of course, in a completely different ideology in these early years than the ideology that we have now. But Stephen King was always, I think, very interested in the plight of African Americans in America. We see this in It as well. And I felt very bad. I listened to a chunk of this on audiobook as I was driving up here, and I felt very bad for the person reading the book because of how many times the N-word is used in this book. But I believe that it is actually a credit to Stephen King that he wanted to show so clearly what it meant to be a person of color in the 70s. And the way that he shows it is by the fact that these characters, the kid in It, and I think no, I can't remember the kid's name in It, sorry, and Hallorann, deal with prejudice continuously. And one thing that Stephen King often does is really demonstrate the evil in his books by making the evil racist. Pennywise constantly shows, I think his name is Mike in It, I think that's right, constantly shows Pennywise using racism to scare Mike. And here, the hotel uses racism to scare Hallorann right at the end when he's just getting to the hotel. But also, Stephen King felt like racism was a huge problem in the United States when he was writing these books. So random characters are racist to Hallorann throughout this story. And I think King put that in there to just show what people had to deal with on a regular basis. So I really think that King was a little bit ahead of his time in that, and he has a tendency. So Hallorann has the shine. He becomes kind of Danny's mentor through this because he's the first person that Danny meets that also has the shine, and of course he is much more used to it and able to use it, so he can kind of guide Danny in how to use it. And it's interesting because the shine connects Hallorann throughout the novel with other people. He meets a random woman on the plane that has the shine, and then he meets a snowplow driver that has the shine, and they're able to connect. It's like a secret connection. And there is a point in the book where Hallorann is afraid that he is going to his death when he goes and tries to help Danny at the Overlook Hotel. And he literally says to himself, why am I going to help this white family, this family that are a part of a country that has treated him with racism? Not them specifically. There were many variety of people in the 70s, but racism was also more openly displayed at this time. And so he's wondering, why is he going to help a white family? But the real connection for him is to Danny and the shine. And the shine defines his personality even more than the color of his skin. And this is another incredible part of Stephen King's writing style, is that he's created a marginalized character and then marginalized him a step further by giving him this psychic power. Stephen King has a tendency to fall into writing the magical Negro tropes, which I think were really popular and not considered a trope in the 70s. We see this in The Stand as well as in The Shining, and it's not, in my opinion, a bad mark against Stephen King. It is just a mark of the ideology and time that he lived in. So Hallorann has this kind of grandfathery, magical, spiritual way about him that actually really truly saves the day. He is a savior to this family. He really is. Without Hallorann in this story, everybody would be dead, and the hotel would be in complete control. He isn't married. He lives kind of an awesome bachelor life where in the summer he works at the Overlook Hotel as a chef, and in winter he goes to Florida and just lives it up in Florida. He has a great friend in Florida that he's known since he were kids. I can't remember his name. But yeah, he's living kind of a great life, and he just randomly will meet, maybe once a year he says he'll meet somebody with the shine, and they'll have a little bit of a connection. And yeah, he just seems like an all-around happy person in his existence. Really great character, and really important to Danny right at the beginning, because he gives Danny rules about how to deal with the hotel. And that can lead us to our next section, which is the hotel itself. So at the opening of this story, when Jack goes to see the hotel and get the job, the hotel is haunted in the way that the actual Stanley is haunted now, in the sense that people will sometimes see apparitions on the stairwell, or in, I think it's room 401. It's been in the Ghost Hunters movie or TV show, I think. Yeah, people will randomly see ghosts in the Stanley. It's probably stories that King heard when he was staying there that night. That, I once saw an apparition on the staircase, or anything like that. And the way that it's described by Hallorann in this book, is that the immense trauma that occurs with murders leave a stain on the place. And people that have the shine can sometimes see the events that created that stain, but they're just pictures like in a movie. This is the way he describes it to Danny. They're not real, and they can't hurt you, because that's what hauntings do. That's how he explains. That's how King explains hauntings and ghosts in the 70s, right? Through this book, through Hallorann's mouth, is that they're just memories that are so traumatizing that they create a pool in the place, and normal people can't see this, but people who shine can sometimes get images of this. But he tells Danny, none of this is real. All you got to do is close your eyes, and the pictures will go away. So the hotel is a normal haunted hotel. It has no mind of its own. It's just a place with a lot of violent history that sometimes people that shine can see those traumatic events. What Stephen King did that was really brilliant in this story, in my opinion, is that he introduced Danny into the Overlook. And Danny shines so incredibly strong, so powerfully, that his shine starts to take these traumatic moments and give them life. It's not until Danny comes into the Overlook Hotel that the Overlook Hotel becomes haunted. And it is a slow burn novel. It is so brilliant because it takes time to wake up. It has to slowly feed off Danny's power to really wake up. So the whole process of the novel is the hotel working on Jack, but also the hotel waking up. And it's a slow process. So at first we get pictures, just pictures, things that can't hurt Danny. And what Hallorann says works. And then slowly the Overlook starts to wake up. And it gains a sentience. It gains consciousness. And all these ghosts start becoming part of the evil that is this hotel that only exists because Danny's there. So Danny is this catalyst, and I love it. There's a part in the book where he calls himself the key because he takes this little key out and starts up a clock. And he looks at this key and goes, I'm the key to this place. Danny figures out that he is the key to everything that's going on. And because of that, the hotel very much wants him. So in a very Shirley Jackson way, the hotel starts messing with Jack. And Jack can see the ghosts because he shines a little bit. Danny probably got his shine from Jack's side of the family. Wendy can't see the ghosts as much, but eventually she does. And there's two explanations for how Wendy can eventually see these ghosts. The first is that Hallorann at one point says all mothers can shine a little bit. All of them can, especially when it comes to their kids. The second way to explain this could be that Danny's power is so strong that it straight up is bringing these ghosts into reality. And I think that is really, truly implied in this book. At the very beginning, if a person with literally no shine at all walked into the Overlook, they wouldn't see anything. They wouldn't see anything at all. You have to shine to see it. So at first, Jack and Danny can see things, but then the hotel feeds on Danny, and all these ghosts, I kind of consider it like puddles. And all these ghosts that are puddles all over this hotel form into one pond or lake that engulfs all of the Overlook and becomes one massive evil. And it's a terrifying evil, and it's called the Manager near the end of the book. And it keeps seducing Jack with concepts that Jack one day could be the manager, and that Jack is very important to the hotel. In fact, half of what works on Jack is the concept that the hotel, he feels like the hotel wants him. He feels special to the hotel, and he thinks he's there to write a book about the hotel, to become the champion of the hotel. And as it goes on, Jack slowly begins to realize that the hotel wants Danny, and the hotel literally has to blitz out Jack's entire personality in order to get him to try to kill Danny, so that the hotel can be alive and sentient and evil for all time. Because once Danny's there, it has the power. And I just want to stop for a second and think about how brilliant Stephen King is. Number one, he took them and put them in a situation where we never question, why don't they just leave? Right? Wendy tries hard to leave, and Jack keeps screwing her up at every moment. He also explained hauntings, albeit in a very 70s way, using the concept of paranormal superpowers or this ESP ability to shine. But he explains why it is that this gets worse and worse and worse and worse. He figures out the worst parts of the haunted house trope and fixes them. And for that, this will always be my favorite haunting book. It's incredible. It makes so much sense. It's really, really outstanding. We're talking about the hotel. I want to continue on talking about the hotel. So even though all these ghosts collect into one evil, wakened by Danny's power, they still have all these separate consciousnesses. Grady is still there, and the old owner of the hotel, whose name I can't forget, the woman in 217, all these people, the dog man, all these people have personalities that make up this greater ghost evil, but they also have their own personalities. And they all died at different times. So what happens is, as the story goes on, all the ghosts' times mix together until you're in this weird kind of temporal, timeless zone, or all times zone, where the hotel is experiencing every moment of its existence at one time. And this all centers around a party that happened in the 20s. And it was maybe it wasn't the 20s, maybe it was the 40s. I don't know. It's all time, so that doesn't really matter. Anyway, there's this party that happened in the past for the hotel, and it was a masked ball, and all kinds of crazy stuff went on that night. And at 12 o'clock, they were all going to unmask. So this party throughout, and this is the Mask of the Red Death influence, I think. The way he describes the evil of the hotel is this party is constantly going on, to the point that Wendy starts finding streamers and stuff all about, and the hotel, the elevator starts running at all different times of the night. The hotel is living all moments at once. So anybody can knock into ghosts at any given time. And that's kind of what makes the hotel a character in this. In a weird way, the hotel is the major character, which is the influence, again, of the fall of the House of Usher, where the haunted building really takes center stage as a character. I feel like I can confidently say that Stephen King read some of the best haunting stories of hauntings, haunted houses that existed, and was able to pull out every aspect of them that was incredible and smush them all together, and then get rid of the cons of this literary trope and create a perfect haunting, especially for the time that it was written. I know now we would be very skeptical to just accept this power of The Shine. I don't think people in the 70s would be as skeptical. Not all people, many people would, but the general zeitgeist didn't allowed in more the concept of people being able to sometimes have moments of premonition and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think he made this kind of perfect haunted house story for the 70s. It was really incredible. A couple more things about the hotel. I know I'm talking about the hotel a lot, but I think this is the most important part of the book. This all these things that happen with this hotel. Number one is that because it's come alive through Danny's shine, it has the ability to read minds and premonitions and all that kind of stuff. And it is able to attack specifically Jack in the ways that will most hurt him. It knows his personality inside and out. It knows its history. It knows that all Jack wants is a drink. And it knows that Jack has a predilection towards violence. And it works on that, which I find incredible. And this slow burn of Jack finally getting a drink is absolutely incredible in this, because once the hotel becomes powerful enough, and once the hotel is all times at once in this weird, and again a connection to Alice in Wonderland, this weird haunted wonderland, maybe in that original story he was talking about, this is the dark carnival or whatever, this wonderland of all times. The hotel is able to, I think, take things like confetti and poppers and all these other things from other times and make them exist the current time, because all time is one time, so there is no current time, so everything exists at all times, and that's how the alcohol comes in. Jack really is drinking, and Wendy can smell it on him. The hotel is able to give it, and it's incredible, and it uses drink in order to bring out another predilection in Jack, which is violence, because they want him to kill Danny so that this evil can continue to exist. And I have to say, this is very important to Jack's arc, because the fear, of course, is that this novel is about a man that abuses his family, but it's not his fault, because it's actually the evil of the place that makes him do that. That is in there. Absolutely. This is a novel about that. But Stephen King does something that I don't see occur in the Amityville Horror, and I don't see occur in Burnt Offerings. And that is that he twice gives Jack a moment to make a choice, which gives Jack agency, which is super important, because King has stated over and over again that this is in some ways an autobiographical novel, especially about his alcoholism. And Jack shifts blame constantly. It gets to the point where he is mad at his son for something, and he's just tried to kill his son, and then like Danny, I think, calls him a liar and says, "You're not my father," and Jack says, "Now your punishment's going to be even worse because you're so evil and such a liar." And I mean, just no logic can get into his head, and this seems to me to be the realest thing in this novel, and shows that Stephen King was actually talking about something he himself had gone through. And I am a sucker for art that looks at things blatantly honestly and allows self-reflection that will reflect badly on the person. I think that is brave and incredible. I love it when I see this kind of stuff. Michael G. Roth from the Swans is a band called the Swans, and he has a tendency to do the same thing in his music. It's incredible that he is so open to really looking at the aspects of himself that aren't great and just openly displaying them. And I think Stephen King kind of does the same things in his book. He's brutally honest, and that quote we read earlier really shows that. So he gives Jack agency twice in this novel. I believe the first time is with the motor, or the snowmobile. There's a moment, and it's written so beautifully in this novel, where Jack suddenly has complete and total clarity. First off, he kind of realizes he's a little bit narcissistic in his drinking, in that he feels like the hotel is all about him, and that he is this head of his family, and that the hotel wants him, and he has this realization that the hotel is messing with him. Crystal clear, he realizes it, and that the hotel wants Danny, and that he has to stop thinking about himself and think about Danny. And he makes a choice at that point to get rid of the magneton. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, he throws a part of the snowmobile out into the snow. So we see some agency. We see Jack make mistakes, and the second part is with the alcohol. He's holding the glass in his hand, and Stephen King gives him a moment of clarity, and he chooses to drink it. And you could argue that the hotel's threatening him seriously. They're getting very angry when he's not drinking. But Jack makes a decision. And I like books that give characters agency. I like that. I don't want to just read the story of a poor guy that was changing, and then a hotel possessed him, and suddenly he couldn't change anymore. That's awful. And the book allows him to make bad decisions and then have the hotel take over, which is great. So in the end, Danny can say stuff like, "You're not my dad," and be right. the evil in the hotel has just completely taken him over, which is incredible. It really it gives Jack agency that if he would have made better choices, he would not have ended up being possessed by a hotel. But on the same note, it allows King to tell the scary haunting story that he is possessed by the hotel. And by the end, he literally takes this mallet. It's not a croquet mallet, it's a rook mallet, I think. And he beats his face with this mallet until all of his teeth are broken off and his face is a mass of nothing unrecognizable. And he connects it very brilliantly to the unmasking that happens at midnight in this eternal ghost party that's going on. And suddenly Jack is the hotel. And they keep calling him it in the narrative at this point. It is coming down in the elevator. It's trying to get to the broiler. It's really brilliant because he's no longer Jack. He's allowed the hotel to completely take him over. And that allowed is super important. And that's what really makes this book stand up to a lot of the other horror novels that use this trope. And for me, that is where all three of the themes, alcoholism, abuse, and haunting, come together in this novel, and what make it such an incredible read. The best haunting story, I think, that I've ever read. It is the top, and Haunting of Hill House is real close. I think I put Haunting of Hill House second and this one first on my horror top 10. And in the end, I don't think, I mean, Jack absolutely does not try to blow up the Overlook Hotel. It is not a moment where he comes to his senses and saves his family by blowing up the hotel. In this book, Jack's already gone. He had his moment where he told Danny to run away from him. And that was absolutely beautiful. And then after that, he beats his face with a mallet and is no longer Jack Torrance. He is the hotel. And is shocked and surprised when he learns that he forgot to vent the boiler. And when he goes down and the boiler blows up, he actually vents it beforehand. I don't know why, but I remembered this as he chooses to blow up the hotel to save his family. And I don't know where that came from. Was that how Doctor Sleep ended in the Mike Flanagan film? I don't remember. If you remember any of that, let me know. Or maybe it's the miniseries. But somehow I got into my mind that Jack Torrance chose to blow up the Overlook Hotel, which is not the case in this book. And I really like that. Of course, Mike Hallorann survives. I like that as well. Stephen King really built up fear that Mike Hallorann was going to die, but he doesn't. And that's incredible. And I'm very happy about that because I really like his character. That's it. I don't know how to praise this novel anymore. It is, in my opinion, a novel worthy of academic study. And I know when I was growing up, and even through my own college degree, that the concept of genre fiction was really, the only way I could put it is shat upon. That somehow it wasn't good enough to be literary fiction, so there was no use in studying it. I remember many classes, creative writing classes or literature classes, where teachers would, on one end, say, you can't write genre fiction in this class because that's not literary and you're here to learn how to write literary fiction. And on the other hand, would have people that just said, well, I don't understand genre fiction, so don't write it because I won't be able to give you notes on it. Either way, Stephen King, I think, has always fought with this concept of he is genre fiction, therefore he's somehow less than literature, and I disagree with that immensely. Stephen King, especially in the books I've read, which are the early ones, I feel like absolutely deserves to be studied academically because the depth in these are incredible. They really are. I've way overtalked what I should. My throat is starting to hurt, and it's worth it for The Shining. Love this book. If you needed any, I assume everybody's watching this has read it, but if you haven't, do. It's incredible. It is really worth it. Thank you so much, you guys, for sticking with me through this long video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed breaking it down and talking about it. I absolutely love this book. If you watched this all the way to the end, thank you very much. If you liked it, please click like. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe, because we'll be making a lot more of it in the future. Thank you so much for watching.